Hey guys, it's Adam from Premium Poker Tools, and in this video I'm going to do a hand analysis for the should you call page. So I'm going to be going through this hand right here. So let's go through it. So our opponent opens to 3 big blinds from the button, and we call from the big blinds with ace-9 offsuit, so ace of clubs, nine of spades. Then we make top pair on the flop. The flop comes ace of spades, 6 of clubs, 3 of clubs, and it goes check, bet, call. Then the turn comes a 7 of diamonds, and the action is the same. It goes check, bet, call. So our opponent bets 2 times. Then the river comes a king of clubs, and then we check, and our opponent bets for a 3rd time, and let's say it's a half pot bet. And then we're faced with the decision of whether or not to call on the river. So I'm going to show you how we can use this should you call page to help us decide whether or not we should call. So step 1 is to enter in which street we're deciding whether or not to call on. So in this spot, we're deciding whether or not to call on the river. We're facing one opponent. So now step 3, we enter our whole cards. So we have ace of clubs, 9 of spades. Step 4 is to enter in what we think their range is pre-flop. So when our opponent opens from the button, what kind of range do we think they're on? I'm going to assume that we're playing kind of like a small stakes game where opponents tend to be like loose, passive. That's kind of what I assume in most of my videos because that's what most of you guys are probably playing and looking at. So I'm gonna pick, I don't know, I'm gonna pick a pre-flop range. I'm gonna pick one something like this. I mean, I was gonna go tighter and assume that they're gonna like limp some stuff, but let's actually not assume that. Let's assume they're a little bit of a better opponent and they're going to be opening this stuff and they're not going to be limping from the button. So this is what I'm going to assume that they open with from the button. So now we move on to step 5 to enter in the flop cards. So the flop comes ace of spades, 6 of clubs, and then 3 of clubs. So we're sitting here with like a backdoor flush draw and top pair with a weak kicker. So it goes check, bet, call on the flop. So now step 6, it's going to ask us what we think that their range is when the flop action is finished. So when our opponent bets the flop, what happens to their range? So when they bet the flop here, this is a good board to c-bet because whenever there's an ace, you have pretty good amount of fold equity. So I think that I'm going to assume that our opponent just bets this flop 100% of the time. Kind of to keep things simple, but yeah, I'm going to assume that they're always betting the flop. When they have like 4-3, their pair is vulnerable, so they might want to bet, to protect their equity. 7-6 might want to bet, so the weak pairs or the middle pairs. And then if they're sitting here with like Jack 8 or something, the ace gives them a good amount of fold equity, so I'm going to assume that they're c-bet bluffing here. So I'm just going to assume that we're not going to narrow their range after the flop, that they're just going to c-bet everything. So now we move on to the turn. So the turn comes a 7 of diamonds. And now we can narrow their range a little bit more because most opponents aren't going to double barrel like their whole range. So what do we think that they're double barreling with here? I'm going to say that they're double barreling all of their top pairs and better for value. And I'm going to say that for bluffs, they're going to be double barreling their flush draws and their open-ended straight draws. But that only leaves us with like, a value to bluff ratio of like 4-1. So we're assuming that they're extremely value heavy, and I don't think that's a bad assumption to make. I think a lot of opponents are very value heavy when they double barrel. A lot of people don't double barrel bluff too much. So, maybe this is not a bad assumption to make, but I'd like to give them a couple more bluffs. So let's see what we can do here. Maybe we can say that they turn their like weak pair plus gut shot combos into bluffs. So I'm gonna click this and I'm gonna say that like pocket fives has a pair plus a gut shot. Same with pocket fours. So those hands have a good amount of equity. Same with 6-5. So with their equity, like they have equity, but they're also vulnerable. So I'm gonna say that they choose to bluff with these hands, and that gives us kind of a little bit of a more reasonable 3-to-1 like value to bluff ratio. So they're a little value heavy on the turn, but not too value heavy. So I think this is like a reasonable assumption to make about what happens to their range on the turn. So now let's move on to the river. This is going to be the most important part. So the river comes a king of clubs. Okay, so step 9 is to enter the river. Now we're going to say what our pot odds are. So the pot odds are going to be 3-to-1 after a half pot bet. So like, let's say the pot, I'm just going to make up numbers. Let's just say the pot is $2 and they bet $1 into the $2 pot. So now the pot's going to be $3 and we need to call 1. So after a half pot bet, we are going to be looking at 3-to-1 pot odds. So we know our pot odds. I'm going to skip this section for now. Now we're going to move on to step 11, and we're going to ask ourselves, what do we think that they're going to be betting the river with? And that's what's going to tell us, whether or not we can call. Because we're sitting here with ace-9 offsuit, and we're looking at a triple barrel. So here we're going to have to decide whether we want to call with our top pair, but with a weak kicker. And this is always a little bit of a tricky spot to be in because, like, we have top pair, it looks like a good hand, but on the other hand, like, our opponent's range is really strong when they triple barrel, especially if it's one of these, like, typical loose passive small stakes players. Like, if we're playing against a guy who's, like, super aggressive, they can have a million bluffs in their range. So in that case, our top pair might be pretty strong. But here, we're a little bit uncertain about it because we're against someone who we assume they're a little tight, a little strong when they triple barrel. So let's see, what do we think that they're triple barreling with? I'm going to start off by saying for sure they're going to triple barrel with their flushes, straights, 3 of a kind, and 2 pair. So that's kind of obvious that they're going to be betting these things for value. I mean, it's possible maybe they're super scared and they don't want to bet on this river because the flush came in. So maybe it's not obvious that they're betting all of these things. I've seen people check back like 2 pair or even 3 of a kinds when the flush comes in. Some people are really afraid of the flush. But I'm going to assume that our opponent is betting these things, and I'm going to assume that top pair, top kicker is going to bet. And let's see where we're at now. Like, let's assume that they're only betting this strong value range. I mean, obviously, I guess we didn't need to check that out. We have 0 equity because they're only betting things that are better than us. And then, same thing with top pair with a good kicker. If we include that, ace jack, ace 10, we have ace 9, we're behind. We have 0 equity. So when we have 3-to-1 pot odds, we need at least 25% equity. So let's see now what happens. What if they're betting all of their top pairs? Now we have 30% equity. So now we can justify calling. We need 25%. So if they are betting all of their top pairs, then, then we have enough equity to call. So that's pretty cool to see. We've learned that if we do think they're betting all their top pairs for three streets, then, then we have enough equity. So let's explore some other things. Let's say they're not betting their top pair weak kicker for value, and let's say that they want to check back with this ace jack ace 10 because they're a little scared of the flush draw. So let's go back to this kind of strong value range, but let's assume that they're going to be betting some things as a bluff, because here we have like all value hands. But it's going to be a little hard to find bluffs, because if we look at what their range is entering the turn, like, the things that they had as bluffs on the turn were their flush draws, but the flushes came in on the river. So there's really not a lot of hands that they can have as a bluff. So these are the only hands that they can have as a bluff right here. 6-5, pocket fives, and pocket fours. So, if we add these hands in as like we think that they're going to be bluffing at some frequency, like that kind of gives us a little bit more equity, but it doesn't give us quite enough to justify calling. And then even, if we add in top pair with a good kicker, things get even worse. Now our equity goes down. So it's going to be hard for us to justify calling on the basis of our opponent having bluffs, because we can see here that they don't really have a lot of bluffs. So, let's kind of go the opposite direction. Let's say that their value range is tighter. So if we uncheck top pair, top kicker, and we say that they're only value betting two pair and better, well, we still only have 22% equity. So we still don't have enough equity to justify calling when their range is bluffs plus two pair and better. Let's explore what happens if we uncheck this and we say, like, they're afraid of the flush and their range is going to be three of a kind and better plus these couple of bluffs. So now if we assume that, then we're good. Then we have 35% when we only need 25%. So after kind of going through all of this, we kind of have a feel for this spot when we have ace 9 and like what we need to justify calling. So if we're going to justify calling here, we either kind of need like one of two things to happen. One thing that can happen is if they're on a super like tight value range, like they're only betting three of a kind and better for value here, but they are bluffing like with these hands that missed. So that's one possibility that can allow us to justify calling. The other kind of possibility is if they're not bluffing ever, but they are value betting pretty thinly. So if they're value betting all of their top pairs with weak kickers, then we can justify calling. Then we have a little bit more equity. But kind of in the more common spot where like maybe they're value betting maybe top pair, top kicker and better with like a couple bluffs, like then we don't have enough equity to call. So in my opinion, I think against most opponents, like, we're not going to be able to justify calling in this particular spot because all of the flushes came in. Like, they can't have a lot of bluffs, and I don't think that they're actually going to be value betting like that thinly. And, I also don't think that they're going to go as wide as value betting like ace 5 offsuit here. That's kind of ambitious, 3 streets when the flush draw comes in. So with all that said, I think we've kind of looked at this hand pretty thoroughly, and I think we can see that most of the time this isn't going to be a call. So to kind of zoom back out, we had this spot right here, and we're looking at what to do here, whether or not we can justify calling. And what we did is we plugged it into this should you call tool, and we kind of went street by street and looked at what our opponent's range is, and then on the river, we looked at like what we think that they're gonna bet with, and in doing that, we kind of developed a feel for what we need to happen to justify calling. And I think that we saw that most of the time we're gonna have to lay down our ace nine. So hopefully that made sense to you guys. If it didn't, you can reach out to me on the contact page. My email is contact@premiumpokertools.com. I'd be happy to help you guys. I kind of went on a spiel here about trying to convince you to reach out to me. So if this didn't make sense, or if you have any thoughts or questions or anything, please reach out to me. My name's Adam. I'm the founder of Premium Poker Tools. Hopefully you guys like this video, and thanks for watching.